The old asylum had been abandoned for decades. That's what everyone said. It stood atop a solitary hill, far from the nearest town, casting its long shadow over the landscape. The locals had long since forgotten it, or at least they tried to. The asylum's name was little more than a ghost on the lips of the elderly and the superstitious, passed down like folklore. A place of madness, tragedy, and inexplicable horrors. I had grown up hearing the stories. The asylum had been built in the early 1900s, a grand, imposing building designed to house the criminally insane. They said the doctors were cruel, the patients tormented, and eventually, it became a place of death, of dark rituals, inexplicable disappearances, and whispers of things far worse than madness. The patients who didn't die were left to rot in their cells, their suffering echoing in the stone walls long after the doors were shut. But those were just stories, right? Or so I thought. I was the type of person who didn't believe in ghosts or curses. I like to think of myself as a skeptic, rational, grounded, someone who didn't let the shadows of old legends cloud my mind. But curiosity has a way of burrowing into your thoughts until you can't let it go. I was in my mid-20s, a recent college graduate looking for adventure. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, forgotten buildings, crumbling estates, and long-lost ruins. The thrill of exploring the unknown, the rush of stepping into a world that time had left behind, it was something I couldn't resist. When I found the map, it felt like fate. I was at the local library, sifting through old records, looking for a project. I didn't know why I picked up that particular book, Historical Sites of the Forgotten West, some dusty, neglected tome from the 70s, but when I opened it, tucked between the pages was a folded map. It wasn't a map of anything well-known. It was old, hand-drawn, its ink smudged and faded with age. But at the bottom, there was a name, Cedar Hills Asylum. The map detailed a long-forgotten path, winding through forests and over hills, leading to the long-abandoned asylum. The faded, crumbling paper seemed to whisper something to me, an invitation. I knew what I had to do. The idea of spending the weekend there was exhilarating. I imagined the abandoned rooms, the peeling wallpaper, the distant echoes of a place long forgotten by history. I imagined capturing it all on film, the rusted beds, the cracked windows, the haunting remnants of a place that had seen too much. The Cedar Hills Asylum wasn't just a place for me, it was an obsession waiting to happen. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, of course. Most people would think I was crazy or at least reckless. And maybe I was. But that's how I ended up driving down a twisting, overgrown path on an early Saturday morning, my headlights cutting through the thick fog that clung to the valley below. The path became narrower and rougher the further I went, the trees pressing in on both sides like dark sentinels. The mist from the valley below had crept up the hill, blanketing the ground in an eerie fog. The air was cold, even for early spring. By the time I reached the top, the sun had just begun to rise, casting an orange glow over the looming silhouette of the asylum in the distance. It was larger than I had imagined, an imposing, Gothic structure, its sharp angles and cracked stone walls giving it the appearance of a fortress built to withstand time itself. I parked my car at the foot of the hill. The iron gates to the asylum were rusted shut, but I found a gap between the bars. With one last glance at the path I had just driven down, I slipped through and began to make my way toward the asylum. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. It was as though the building itself was breathing, exhaling a suffocating weight. There was a strange hum to the place, a subtle vibration that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. I dismissed it at first, just my imagination, I thought, but there was something about the sound that felt wrong. The front doors were cracked open, hanging on their hinges as though someone or something had once tried to escape. I pushed them open, and the smell hit me immediately, a mixture of mildew, dust, and something sour like rot. The floors creaked beneath my boots as I stepped inside. The light was dim, filtering through the broken windows, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and stretch toward me. The lobby was a cavernous room with high ceilings and cracked tiles underfoot. I could see remnants of old furniture, chairs with their legs broken, torn curtains still clinging to their rods. The walls were covered in layers of peeling paint, and in some areas, the plaster had crumbled away entirely, revealing the bare bones of the building. It looked like a place that had died long ago but had somehow refused to stay dead. I ventured deeper into the asylum, drawn by an invisible pull that I couldn't quite explain. The silence here was thick, almost oppressive, as though the building was holding its breath. There were no sounds, no birds, no animals, not even the whisper of wind through the trees outside. It was as if the asylum existed in a separate reality, one where time had no meaning. The further I went, the more I felt like something was watching me. I kept telling myself it was just my nerves, just the unease that comes with being in a place like this. But it didn't feel right. Every so often I would hear a faint sound, a scraping, like fingernails dragging across the floor, or a soft thud echoing from somewhere deep inside the asylum. I followed the hallway, past doorways that led to rooms filled with broken furniture, overturned chairs, and remnants of lives long forgotten. I tried to keep my thoughts focused on the exploration, on capturing the eerie beauty of the place with my camera. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Something was with me, watching, waiting. It wasn't until I reached the old ward that I truly began to feel it. The ward was a long, dark hallway, its walls lined with the rusted remnants of old iron doors. The rooms had been cells, small and cramped, with heavy metal bars on the windows. The beds were still there, if you could call them beds. Rusted frames with torn, rotting mattresses. The scent of decay was thick in the air, mixed with something else, something that made the back of my neck prickle. As I moved down the hall, I noticed something strange. Scratches. Not just the usual scuff marks you might expect from time and neglect, but deep gouges. Long, deliberate scratches as though someone or something had been desperately trying to escape. The walls were covered in these marks, jagged and uneven, reaching from the floor all the way up to the ceiling in places. I stopped in front of one door, its iron bars bent out of shape. I could hear something faintly behind it, scratching, scraping. For a moment, I hesitated. Maybe it was just an animal. But the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate, as if something was trying to get out or perhaps trying to get in. I pushed the door open, and the room inside was empty. Nothing but dust and debris. But that's when I saw the mirror. It was large, cracked in several places, but still hanging on the wall. And in the reflection, I didn't see my own face. Instead, I saw a man pale, gaunt, his eyes wide and staring. His expression was one of pain or maybe something worse. I turned around quickly, my heart racing, but the room was empty. The man was gone. I backed away from the mirror, my breath shallow. What was happening? I didn't know what I had just seen, but I felt it deep in my gut. A feeling of dread so overwhelming that it was almost physical. As I turned to leave, a voice came from behind me. Faint at first, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. Stay. Stay with us. I froze. The voice was cold, hollow, and yet familiar, like something buried deep inside my memory. I turned around, scanning the room, but there was no one there. Only the mirror and the darkness. You're one of us now. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls seemed to close in on me. The temperature dropped. The air felt thick, like I was suffocating. My vision blurred, and I stumbled back, feeling dizzy, nauseous. The whispers grew louder, overwhelming, as if they were coming from every direction at once. Come back, it's not over. I ran. I don't know how I made it out of the ward or how I found the exit, but I did. And when I stepped back outside into the fading light of day, I thought I had escaped. But the asylum wasn't finished with me. I left the asylum that night, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed me home. They whispered in my sleep. They whispered as I walked down the street, as I sat in my apartment, as I tried to live a normal life. And sometimes, when I look into a mirror, I see him, the man in the asylum, staring back at me. Waiting. I thought the asylum was empty. But I was wrong. The asylum had never left.